Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and recently the discussion has reemerged again of if Apple is doomed, is Apple not innovating anymore? Is Apple kind of faltering here with their low iPhone sales? And lumping in other factors as well, like the state of Mac hardware, and even little things like the iPad Pro's bending. A lot of people seem to think that Apple is headed in the wrong direction. Most notably, where I see a lot of Apple fans getting worried is Apple's ever increasing dependence and shift on services revenue. And with Tim Cook even stating multiple times that services is an area where Apple is looking to expand and to really grow fast to make up the lost income for iPhone sales shrinking, many people are worried that Apple is focusing to become more of a services company and less of a hardware and software company. So let's address that in today's video. Is Apple heading in the wrong direction? Now listen, I'm not the oldest guy in the world, but I've been using Mac since the first iMac that was released in 1998. It was my first exposure to the internet, it was my first exposure to the creative side of computing, and was also my first exposure to computer games instead of console games. I played a lot of StarCraft on that 1998 Mac. Which is ironic because Macs are not known for their ability to game. And it's funny because ever since I've been a fan of Apple, I've been hearing the same narrative over and over. And those are that Apple is too expensive, Apple isn't open enough, and Macs can't game. And the one assured thing is that whenever Apple releases a new product, it is instantly mocked for what it is. And we don't even really have to look too far back to find an Apple product that when it was initially released, a lot of people mocked the way it looked and the way it worked, and that would be AirPods. And now AirPods are a huge hit, you see them everywhere, and people love them. But the same was said about the Apple Watch, the same was said about the iPad, and of course the same was said about the iPhone. When those products first came out, they were initially mocked as not being a very good product. People made fun of the design on all of those products, and I feel like they've been proven wrong in almost all of those circumstances. However, Apple getting into the services game is a little bit different here, and a lot of people maybe are justifiably worried. I even share your concern in this space. I'm not really interested in what Apple has planned for their next TV streaming service. Don't get me wrong, I have an Apple Music subscription, and occasionally I watch some TV or movies, but I'm not interested to see what the latest and greatest show is that Apple produces more than I am excited to see what next hardware or software innovation that Apple will release. And again, I don't think that is a crazy notion to be scared of, especially when Tim Cook said that they are focused on growing that services category, when we see Apple spending a lot of money in the TV area, and we now hear news reports of Apple working on a new subscription service, and we're also seeing things like Apple Music on Amazon Echo. We're now hearing rumors that maybe Apple Music will be brought to Google Home. Of course, we're hearing rumors about the rumored Apple new subscription service, and if I say rumor one more time, I know people are gonna point out in the video. So let's just say there are a lot of things that Apple is working on in regards to services revenue. So if Apple is really working on finding the next big Hollywood hit, rather than focusing on making the next great hardware product, then that might be an area where people like me and Apple fans are very concerned. And even Apple expanding the iTunes and AirPlay 2 services to third-party TV manufacturers in preparation for their new TV streaming service. Apple developing software for third parties is not something we're really used to seeing, but that just goes in line with Apple increasing its focus on services revenue. But are these concerns really valid? The more I thought about Apple expanding into music and television and news, the more I started to realize that Apple, in a way, has always been a little bit of a services company. Now you might be thinking, wait, Apple was a services company even in the days back of Steve Jobs? Yeah, they kinda were. When the iPod was released, Apple needed its own store to start selling music, and they released iTunes. And iTunes kind of revolutionized the entire way that the music industry worked, at least when it came to purchasing music. You could finally buy songs one at a time. You didn't have to buy the entire album. And instead of people going and pirating songs, which was rampant at the time, Apple made the cost low enough, about $1 a song, that you could just go ahead and purchase. And that was convenient enough for most mainstream people to stop pirating a lot of music and just purchase it off of iTunes. Apple really never sold this service, but Apple was also a pioneer in the podcasting space. And Apple Podcasts is a big reason why podcast is such a big industry that it is. They were one of the first people to really promote this thing on stage at their events, and they kind of sold it with their Macs, as you can create a podcast in applications like GarageBand. So they are kind of responsible for putting all this focus and effort and bringing podcasting to a mainstream audience. But it didn't stop there. Apple eventually expanded the iTunes store to not only include music, but to include movies and television as well. And much like the argument for music, you are no longer bound to buy an entire season of a TV show you liked. You could buy the episodes individually. iTunes TV shows even saved a show that you probably know of and you probably watch, a little show called The Office. The Office wasn't that popular when it was released on TV, but a lot of people found the hit by watching it on iTunes. So here you have Apple making a strong service in music, podcasting, and TV shows and movies, strong enough and influential enough to save a network TV show. Even with this new rumors of a new subscription service, this isn't the first time that Apple has tried its hand at making a newspaper. When the iPad was first released, Apple went ahead and partnered with News Corp to make a special newspaper for the iPad called The Daily. And even though The Daily failed miserably when it was released, this was during the time of Steve Jobs, and we can kind of see Steve Jobs' focus as Apple as providing this entertainment value and almost as a services company. Of course, the bulk of Apple's services revenue comes from the App Store, which again was released during Steve Jobs' time. Now, we don't traditionally think of the App Store as a services part of Apple's business, but it is, and they make a lot of money selling apps on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. So here you have Apple providing all these different services and charging customers for quite some time now on these things, and it didn't seem like people were worried about Apple becoming a more services-focused company during the reign of Steve Jobs. And the more I explored this, the more I realized that maybe Apple isn't really shifting to becoming a services company. They're just kind of shifting the way they sell you the products they used to sell you. Every day, less and less people are less likely to purchase music or movies or TV shows on iTunes. They're more likely to get that from either an Apple Music subscription service or a subscription service to their favorite streaming platform like Netflix or Hulu. So really, only the business model of providing you these services has changed from you purchasing it once and having it forever to someone offering you a subscription service with a catalog of content and of course producing original content as well to draw you into the service and to purchase it. Now this is the new way to sell this stuff rather than the old way that Apple kind of pioneered doing it of selling it to you singly and individually. Apple now has to change their business model for a lot of different things that they tried in the past, because if they keep the iTunes model, it's not going to lead them into the future. And the more and more I started to research this, the more I realized that maybe Apple isn't heading in the wrong direction. Apple just needs to stay current with their services offering, and they're kind of playing a little bit of catch up, especially in the TV space where they have been selling movies and TV shows on iTunes, but really haven't offered a subscription service yet. And again, I think the main thing that people are worried about is that because Apple is now focusing on expanding this services growth, that they aren't worried about the hardware and software of their products. But I don't find this true either. I think we just got one of the best software releases ever, with iOS 12 being a really stable platform for iOS. Although iPhone sales have been a little bit stagnant, I still think the iPhone XR is one of the best hardware and cost iPhones I've personally ever seen. The latest iPad Pro is probably one of the best hardware products that Apple has ever released. All they have to really do is catch up in the software, which is rumored to be happening with iOS 13, but as a hardware standpoint, the iPad Pro is really amazing, so I'm not seeing any slowdown of hardware innovation by Apple here. With the Apple Watch Series 4, you're seeing Apple's commitment to a new product category by announcing some really cool stuff. Not only a great new hardware redesign, but also some life-saving benefits like that ECG embedded right into the watch. And we see story after story after story of the Apple Watch saving people's lives. And with future health initiatives like glucose monitoring, and with Tim Cook even going on to say on record that he believes Apple's greatest contribution to mankind will be in the health area, this doesn't sound like a company that is only focused on services revenue. We even have the story of Apple working to include iOS apps on the Mac platform, a platform that a lot of people thought that Apple was going to kill off. It still looks like there's innovation there, and even though Apple's Mac hardware hasn't been the greatest, it looks like they are set to change that in 2019 with the release of the Mac Pro, with the recent release of the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini, with the rumors of that 16.5-inch Pro MacBook Pro. It looks like Apple is finally starting to get back into the mindset of making really great Mac hardware. And it might be easy to get swept up in the narrative that Apple isn't innovating anymore, especially with companies like Samsung and Huawei releasing foldable phones. But I went over that, and I don't think these are going to be great products out of the gate, and maybe Apple one day will release a foldable phone, but I also think that they're really hard at work at making the next great platform for augmented reality, whether that be through our iPhones and iPads, or probably on something we wear on our face. In a way, I'm an optimist, and I still think that Apple has a lot to contribute to the hardware industry, and I still think that Apple is hard at work at that, and I still think there are plenty of great days ahead for them. But enough about what I think. Let me know what you think. I'm really interested to hear if you agree with me that Apple has kind of always been a services company, or are you worried that Apple is focusing too much on services right now and not focused enough on their hardware, software, and finding the next big thing? I recently launched a Discord, so if you want to connect more with me and connect with the community, make sure you check out the link in the description and join our Discord group. I'd really like to see you all there. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.